Hi, I'm Stephanie Sebi, the author of Quilt Addicts Anonymous, and welcome to the 2014 Block of the Month series. This month we're working on May blocks, and they are double pinwheels. This is going to finish up our second border. So we're going to learn how to make these all from squares, and then how to get these points coming together really well as well. So that's what we're going to be working on today. So for full measurements and instructions, go to quiltaddictsanonymous.com. And you can get the measurement instructions for cutting instructions as well as assembling your your second border. So I've got what's going to be these two parts of the double pinwheel. So I have my lighter fabric of that, and I'm going to draw a line from point to point on the wrong side of that fabric. So this is just like when we're making all those half square triangles as far as how we start it. So you don't have to make this very dark. I'm making it dark so you can see it at home, but you just need to make it dark enough so that you can see it when you're putting that through your sewing machine. And I'm doing two here, and you'll see why in a little bit here. Alright, so now I'm going to take those and I'm going to layer them right sides together with the other fabric that's going to make that up. So I've got my purple fabric in this case that I'm layering that right sides together with. And then we're just going to sew a quarter of an inch, a scant quarter of an inch, along either side of that line. And you can chain piece these, which basically means as soon as I get that one through, I'm going to lift up that presser foot, slide the next one in, and I'm lining the edge of my presser foot up with that line that I drew. And now I'm just going to sew that right down to the end. And when you're done, just turn it all around and sew down the other side of that line. So I finished sewing down the two sides of those lines, and now I have to cut them apart to make a couple of different half square triangles that will make up the double pinwheel. So what you want to do now is take your little ruler, and you want to line it up right on top of that line that we drew. And you just want to cut down the center of both of those. And then we're going to bring it over to the iron. So we've got to press all these open, and it's the same way we pressed them all open for when we were doing half square triangles earlier in this series. So I'm going to lay these all down so that the dark side of the fabric is up. I'm going to set my seam by just setting my iron down for a second on top of that. And then I'm going to open up the triangle, and I'm going to use my fingers to gently press that open before I use the iron. That helps keep the triangle from getting a little wonky, because you are working with a bias here, and it can sometimes stretch out on you. So go ahead and do that for all of the half square triangles that we have made so far. Alright, so we've got all of our blocks pressed open now, and normally we would trim at this point, but we're not going to do that for the double pinwheels, and I'll show you why once we get to the very end and we square it up then. So I'm laying these so that the wrong side is up, and I'm going to mark from point to point. And this time I'm using a blue chalk so that you guys can see this at home, because this is going to be a little hard to see on the purple. So you just want to mark that from point to point, and then you're going to layer it up with your neutral fabric right sides together like that. And if you can see here, your neutral fabric is just a hair larger than the half square triangle we made, and that's okay. It's supposed to be like that. So as long as you don't have points hanging off the edges, you're fine. So just center that and get your points pretty much in line with each other. And then we're going to sew a scant 1/4 inch down either side of that seam. And again, you can chain piece these, so go ahead and get them all ready to go, and then run them all through your sewing machine. So once I get down to the end of one side, I'm going to want to go around and do the other. Now we've got to cut this apart. It's the same way we cut apart the other one. Just lay your ruler right on top of that line. Cut down the center. And now we're going to have 2 pinwheels, but they're going to be opposite. And so if we look at it, we have one where the green is on the top and one where the green is on the side. So you're going to have pinwheels that are going in 2 separate directions, like these 2 here. And we're going to use all of those in the border. So let's press these open, and then I'll show you how to put the whole block together. So we want to press it open with the neutral side of the fabric facing up. And that's because the seam makes this bulky, so it's easier to get a nice flat block if we have it positioned with the neutral fabric up in this long triangle for that half square triangle, or for the double pinwheel lining. So you want to do this until you have at least 4 of each of these pinwheel units. So you're going to have 8 of these total. 4 will look like this and 4 will look like that. So get 8 of them ready, and then we're ready for the next step. Now that we have all of our units made and pressed open, now is the time that we want to trim. So we're going to trim these to 3.5 inches square, and we have to look at a couple of specific points on the ruler to make sure we're going to get these points coming out exactly how we want them. So first of all, you've got a 45-degree line on your ruler. You want to make sure that is lined up with the seam line of the 2 halves of the block. I also want to make sure that my point right here at 3.5 is right at the point of the fabric. And then if I could go over to the edge of where 3.5 is, that also is right on a point. And so if these 3 areas are all together, then you will have a good solid point at the center of your block. So now that I'm happy with where that's at, I'm going to trim up the side and the top. And we're not really cutting off a lot, but it makes a huge, huge difference in terms of the final quality of your product, your quilted product. So now I'm looking at a few things again. One, my 45-degree line is still lined up with this fold of this, or the center of this block. My 3.5 is still at the point where these 2 fabrics come together. And then I'm making sure that my 3.5 inch line down here is in line with my cut edge. And once that's all in line, then I can trim up the top here. And what I like to do when I'm trimming these is create 2 separate stacks, because remember we have mirrored blocks here, and it's going to look funny if you try to put the 2 of those together. So if you keep the stacks separate at the cutting stage, then you're going to have a little bit easier time when we're putting it all together. So now let's actually put the block together. Let's arrange this. And I like to arrange it right next to my sewing space, because then I am less likely to accidentally put something in the wrong spot between when I'm flipping and getting ready to sew and when I'm actually sewing it together. And for full assembly cutting instructions and your assembly diagram for this, for both halves of the block, make sure you go to quiltaddictsanonymous.com and click on the Block of the Month tab. From there you'll be able to get patterns to all the blocks of the month as a free download on craftsy.com. So I've got everything lined up right next to me here. And I'm just going to take one side and flip it over to the other. And if we get close with the camera here, we'll be able to see that these seams are going to butt up next to each other real nicely here. So you could pin that if you want, or you could just hold them together. But these should butt up together the way our seams butt up together for some of the other blocks that we've made. So I've got these ready to go, and I'm just pinching this end down here. I'm not putting a pin in, but that's your preference if you want to do that. And I'm just sewing a 1/4 inch seam down the side of the block. And then when I'm ready, I'm just going to come over and I'm going to grab my second side, flip those right sides together. I'm going to line up those 2 points and line up my back end here. And throw that half of the block through as well. And once I get it going, I like to stop and adjust my corners, my bottom corner, to make sure that those are together as well. So again, when we press this, we want to make sure that we're pressing towards the path of least resistance. And in this case, it's going to be with your neutral fabric facing up, because then we're not pressing against a couple of seams here. This one has 2 seams on it, and this one only has 1 down in the corner. So we're going to want to set that seam, and then I always like to use my fingers to press this open as well, because your block is going to kind of want to go this way because there is not a seam that you're pressing against on this side. But by pressing that open with your fingers first, you're able to help make sure it stays nice and square. So we're going to press open this side too. And then you're going to have some flipping to do to make sure that your pinwheel is back going the right direction. So we got to flip this around. And now our pinwheel is going the way it's supposed to. And I've got a seam going this way and a seam going this way, which means when I lay these two together, these 2 seams are going to butt up real nicely, which is perfect for getting that really nice point. So we can see we have our seams going to one side and the other, and there is no overlap and no gap in between there. So I'm going to put a little pin in the right side of that. And one thing I noticed when I teach this in person is sometimes people don't pin right in that seam line, and you really need to, because this is where it matters if that point is in line. Right where your 1/4 inch is going to cross over just to the on the seam line side of this triangle. It doesn't matter if your pin is in here, it needs to be right there, because that's where that point is, and that's where your pin needs to be as well. One more step and then we are done. So pinning is really a personal preference. If you wanted to pin all of these corners and a couple of times in between, that would be absolutely up to you. I tend to pin as little as possible, so I only pin where it's absolutely necessary, which in this case is right where that pinwheel join is at the center of the block, because if that's off, you're really going to be able to tell. The rest of the time I just like to line it up by sight. So we're going to press this open, and this is kind of your moment of truth, where you get to find out how good your center joint is. And I'm pretty happy with this one. Let's get that pressed open real quick, and then we'll take a good peek at it. So you want to try to make sure that your pinwheels are all, your points are all visible, and they're all meeting at about the same spot. I'm perfectly happy with this one. It could be a little better, but by the time it's quilted and washed, you're never going to be able to tell the difference. So this is, once you get done with all these blocks, you have enough to do the second border. So put that together and go to quiltaddictsanonymous.com and click on the Block of the Month tab for the full assembly diagrams. You can download them for free there. And thanks for following along.